Welcome to the target stream for MintPress News. I am your host, Robert Inlakesh. As always, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Now, since our last stream, Iran decided to launch an unprecedented missile wave on U.S. facilities in Bahrain, using around up to 100 missiles, according to some sources, while also going on the offensive against U.S. proxy militias in Iraq and trading blows with the United States for days now. All of this as the Yemen front continues to heat up and the region braces for the expansion of the regional war. All of that we're going to go and get into, plus a lot more in the stream. We've got a lot to go through today, a lot of content. But before we begin, the target stream is 100% viewer funded. In the last 2 years, we were financially targeted and banned by PayPal and had our fundraisers taken down by Indiegogo and GoFundMe. They even withheld our funds. So we are looking for 300 new members to keep this news show alive. And you can join us on Patreon or right here on YouTube with our membership program. So get right into things. There are currently, as I speak right now, a series of airstrikes that are being carried out by the United States on Iran. Donald Trump has been signaling that he wants to escalate his strikes throughout the country. We're currently seeing that happening with the targeting of bridges and the targeting of civilian vehicles. So that is currently happening at this time. Now, Trump has obviously publicly stated this and said that if the Iranians do not back down and do what he wants, he is considering expanding operations. He's also indicated that he will launch ground operations against Iran. And so it is speculated, and it appeared as if he was hinting at going and capturing some of those islands, which we've looked at on the show a number of times. Of course, Iran is fighting back. This is not happening without any pushback. And we've started to see some of the results of Iran's pushback. So that's been coming out with the satellite images that have been released. Now, because the United States has given orders to these satellite companies to blur and reduce the resolution of their imagery in the region, we don't always get the clearest images, but people have been trying to get behind that. They've been get around that, by comparing images before and after. And in some cases, the explosions and the impacts are clearly so large that it's at this point undeniable. Perhaps the biggest piece of news for today was this that you're seeing here on screen. Now, this is the Crown Plaza Hotel in Oman. Now, the reason why this is such a big development is because, number one, Iran was not targeting Oman before, but now it is. So it's been considered by the United States as somewhat of a surprise attack that was carried out. This was a drone strike. Now, Iranian television has been talking about this all day, and it appears to have been confirmed because there were some sources that claimed to have called the hotel, and they confirmed that they were subjected to an attack of some sort, but that they are still operating and taking guests. But why this is such a big issue is because this is a hotel, the Crown Plaza, where U.S. forces are allegedly staying. And it's explicitly just U.S. forces that are supposedly at this location. So that would indicate that if this drone attack was successful, there could have been a significant number of U.S. casualties. Now, the United States, of course, CENTCOM, or as I like to call it, COPCOM, has not admitted any casualties up to this point, despite the fact that earlier this week, Monday night or Tuesday morning, depending upon where in the world you are, Iran began launching one of its new waves of its offensive combating the United States. And this wave included around 100 plus missiles and we have no idea how many drones, to be honest with you, but over 100 missiles. And it was considered as one of the single biggest strikes ever on Bahrain, specifically US facilities in Bahrain. Now, the Iranians have already destroyed many military facilities in Bahrain, which has forced the United States to reposition its troops to different areas and to reposition its military assets. Also, the air defenses in Bahrain have already been significantly degraded as well, and there's some footage that actually has emerged. I'll just pull this up on screen here, which a lot of people originally, because there are other angles of this that were filmed, people were wondering whether this was actually an Iranian ballistic missile that released sort of flares. But this is actually a Patriot missile that misfired and exploded. And an enormous amount of Patriot missiles, which these interceptor missiles that the United States fires, they cost about $4 million per missile, per interceptor. They're running on such low supply that we saw, images and videos of these Patriot missiles misfiring and them firing up in abundance as well. And then after that, we saw that the CRAM system was deployed, and that the Patriot missile system was really not being used very much. So it indicates that really the number of interceptors that they have there in the Gulf protecting their forces is dwindling greatly. I believe the only place where there are still believed to be a large amount of interceptors that are available and systems that are being used is in the United Arab Emirates. Bahrain has perhaps been hit one of the hardest, but it has gotten so bad, the missile strikes that are being carried out, including some that are using, 1 or 2 ton warheads on these ballistic missiles, that they've cracked the cement. And this is something that was previously admitted. This is not controversial. They've cracked the cement inside of the ports where the US Fifth Fleet is based. And we have a number of different videos that have come out since from Bahrain, but also, again, just to take a look here at some of this imagery that has emerged of these Iranian strikes. This is in Bahrain, an Iranian drone strike. And also we had footage satellite imagery emerge from Kuwait. Again, and also Qatar. And these show direct hits. Now, again, because CENTCOM doesn't admit its casualties, we don't know. But on the previous stream, I mentioned an example of where the United States in the past lied about its casualty count, and then it started emerging over time what actually transpired and how many casualties they suffered. And I'll again refer back to this because this is in the past and we do know this. This is on the public record. Back in 2020, when the Trump administration decided to assassinate Iran's top general of the Quds Force, the IRGC, Qasem Soleimani, Iran responded, and Iran gave a 30-minute warning to the Iraqis before they struck. And so the United States had pre-warning, and they struck specifically. Ain al-Assad base was the base that was hit the worst, but also some places in northern Iraq. And initially, Donald Trump came onto television and he claimed that no US casualties had been suffered. There was nobody injured, nobody killed. And then we started to hear slowly, there was this trickle of information that came out where we learned, it went from dozens to suddenly it popped up over 100 traumatic brain injuries, and that all of these soldiers were evacuated to facilities in Europe. So that was with less sophisticated Iranian ballistic missiles, with more pre-warning, the United States knew that this was going to happen. And nowhere near the scale of the attacks that we've seen against US facilities. Especially during this past week, the Iranians have not held back. They really have gone after a lot of US assets in different Persian Gulf nations and also Iraq and Jordan. So the idea here that hundreds and hundreds of missiles, God knows how many hundreds of these Shahid drones that have been fired, and other types of drones that have been fired both by the IRGC and the Iranian army, that they have caused no casualties, it's a little bit sus. So again, when this news emerged about the hit on the Crown Plaza Hotel in Amman, which allegedly houses US forces, that is a cause for more questions about how badly they are, how many casualties they are hiding. And we heard a number of different allegations earlier in the week that a dozen soldiers had been injured in a strike on the US ATACMS missiles that were taken out by Iran in what was regarded as a preemptive strike against their positions in Kuwait. The United States denied that they had suffered casualties there. But again, we have the footage of what happened and the aftermath and the explosions that took place, and it's pretty damning. Now, more about the lies that are being told by these Arab governments that are hosting US bases, because this is something that I believe it's important to focus on here, is that they are evidently not telling the truth. They're not being truthful with the presence of US forces in their country. And also, they're not being truthful with what their air defenses are doing and how they are performing. Because these countries, really, the air defenses are controlled by the United States. They are not actually their own air defense systems, and their radar systems as well, which Iran has sought to take out. They're there to be used at the discretion of the US military and CENTCOM. So that is something that I believe is important to keep in mind here. So we're going to take a look at that. Having some technical issues here. Pull it down. So while we're trying to pull this up here, I'm just going to show a clip of Iran. They released some footage of their missiles and drones firing. So we're going to play that while we try and apologies there for the audio. But these are some of the ballistic missiles that were fired over the past few days. And then you'll see drones as well that were fired. And it's important to note that when you're watching this, that these munitions are being fired from bases that have been dug out after US strikes. The US attacks on these bases have been completely ineffective. It takes around 48 hours for the Iranians, roughly at this point, to dig out the entrances and exits to their underground missile bases. And so the United States are hitting these bases, but obviously they're not able to penetrate them. And so they're just going to try and close to close off the entrances and exits, which again, it just delays the inevitable because it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop and have an effect on their ability to continue to launch. So for some reason, it's not. So apologies there. We're having a few technical issues, unfortunately, with pulling up some of the content here. Just going to take this down. So what I was going to try and demonstrate was that Jordan has openly denied that it even has U.S. bases on its soil, and that came in response to a Iranian statement that was issued that was directed towards Jordan after a number of strikes were committed against U.S. facilities inside of Jordan. And these were some rather intense strikes, and the local population in Jordan were rather disturbed and took note of the intensity of the strikes that were being committed. And so after that, Jordan's foreign minister came out and said that we have an agreement with the United States, but we don't have US military bases on our soil, which is just blatantly a lie. I mean, Jordan itself is like a US, Israeli, British intelligence hub. So the concept that there aren't US bases there, or bases that are being used by the United States, is utterly ridiculous. What else is ridiculous is that we got some footage that popped up that was being shared about. What you were hearing there is Iranian air defense fire. They were trying to shoot down this drone. Eventually they did. This is allegedly an Emirati drone that was fired towards Bandar Abbas in the south of Iran. And so later on, we heard reports of explosions in Dubai. And the Emiratis denied that there were even any explosions. So keep that in mind here. This footage came out and people were trying to demonstrate, oh, there's no explosions. But up in the sky, people pointed out that it does look like there were 2 interceptor missiles that detonated in the skies above Dubai. Now, it's not confirmed that there has been an Iranian attack. However, the Emiratis simply deny everything. They deny having launched drones towards Iranian targets, and they deny that there were any explosions despite them being reported. So it's not something that when it comes to especially the Emiratis, you're never going to get 100% confirmation of anything unless somebody is brave enough to pull out a camera and film it, quite frankly. Because I know people through personal connections that were Palestinians and were living in Dubai, a number of them actually, living in Dubai for many years. And they were suddenly kicked out. You know, they woke up one morning and they were deported to another country. And they were deported because they made light comments on social media. So the idea that they're going to share what actually happens in terms of their military activities and how healthy their air defense system is, whether Iran struck targets, we know that they openly lie about this. There's been a lot of work done on the topic, in fact, because during the war, in fact, there was an attack, a drone strike that hit the airport in Dubai. Now, initially, the Emirati authorities completely denied that this happened. And then there was a man who filmed the drone hitting a fuel tanker at the airport, and that got published. So, I mean, it's rather pathetic. But see, all of these Arab Gulf countries, unfortunately, don't really have any autonomy. So even if they wanted to, and I believe in the case of the UAE, maybe they'll try and pay Iran or something like that not to strike them. But they have been quite aggressive throughout this conflict. Up until about a month or so ago, they were the most aggressive out of any of the US allied Gulf states. But they just don't have even the autonomy to be able to say no to the United States. I mean, you have somebody like Mohammed bin Salman, who is the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. And this guy is somebody that I think it's fair to say he has quite a big ego. And as I've mentioned before, one of the reasons why Saudi Arabia, when they were negotiating with Ansarullah in Yemen, why they couldn't reach an agreement in the past was because Yemen was insisting that Saudi Arabia apologize. And of course, how dare MBS apologize for attacking Yemen and admit guilt in what he had caused? So this is just to demonstrate the level of sort of arrogance there. But then it comes to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump not so long ago was talking about how he is kissing my ass. Saudi Arabia is kissing my ass, he says. Suddenly the ego just dies down. There's nothing there to say about it anymore. Because quite frankly, again, like these countries, they handed their sovereignty over to the United States. They allowed the United States to implant their military forces. They bought all of their technology. And really, in a way, the United States helped them economically, of course. But, they sacrificed their sovereignty for this. And so it's not like for them to lie and to, behave in a way that is so lowly. It makes sense, because what are they going to do? Unless the United States leaves the region and Iran forces them to leave the region, they cannot enjoy any level of sovereignty whatsoever. They can't. That's just the truth. So when you see this and you see these reports surfacing, like Dubai denying that there were even explosions, right? And they took down all 150 out of 20 missiles that were fired at them. That's something that we should all keep in mind, because they're never going to be truthful. They're never going to admit what is happening to them. So away from the Gulf a little bit, the Iranians also decided to launch a significant campaign against the Kurdish groups in Erbil and in Iraqi Kurdistan. They fired large batches, salvos of missiles and drones towards targets affiliated with the Kurdish Iranian opposition and other Kurdish aligned groups that are, of course, backed by the United States and the Israelis in Iraq. And we've heard publicly on a number of occasions that the Trump administration was hoping to use these Kurdish organizations to invade Iranian territory. And so Iran has taken this very seriously. Iran has deployed its military along the western border and has even explicitly threatened that they will carve out a security zone in the event that they are attacked. So that is a big escalation, and it's not all that shocking that it has come to this. But here, this footage that you're seeing comes from the Erbil airport. Now, at the airport, there is a U.S. military base. They use it as a military base, a segment of it. And so what you're seeing here, these sort of scorch marks after a strike that are revealed, what you're seeing here is allegedly a strike on a Patriot missile system. And there were videos that also emerged as well, which reported to have shown these air defense systems burning. So there were large-scale attacks that took place there. In return, the United States so far has primarily struck the south of Iran. And its idea here is, publicly, what it states is that it wants to degrade the abilities of Iran to control the Strait of Hormuz. And I'll demonstrate why that's very difficult and that's not going to happen. But another thing that it does indicate, so the United States wants all along southern Iran, the coast here, they want to degrade Iran's ability to fire missiles and drones at ships, to be able to monitor ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz. And now there are no ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump says time and time again that Hormuz is open and that we own it and we're going to be the guardians. Well, nothing is going through now because every time a ship tries to transit the Strait of Hormuz, it is struck by Iran. Now, just looking at this geographically here, it's very obvious why this is not going to work. Number one, look how wide or long the border is here with the Persian Gulf, how much territory or the shoreline that Iran shares with the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. It's an enormous amount of territory. So taking the idea that you can take out all of Iran's capabilities in the area is a little bit of a long shot. Now, the United States most certainly can degrade Iran's ability to perhaps act as quickly and, give them troubles. No one doubts this. But really, you look at here, this mountainous region, this here again makes it even more difficult because when you have mountainous terrain here, to try and take out Iran's assets, a lot of its assets, including its naval assets, are underground. So you have to try and take out these underground facilities, these underground naval bases, missile bases, facilities. And also everything that they are operating is all domestically produced. So we saw, for example, during the 12-day war, when Israel launched its surprise attack against Iran, that they were able in the first, let's say, day or so of the war to take Iran's air defenses offline to a large extent. They did this through sabotage agents on the ground working in their favor and also striking some of their air defense as well. But then Iran was able to get it all back online because it's all domestically produced and they can rebuild it. And it's not, they have the parts there. So it's not like they have bought foreign equipment and it takes a long time to produce these systems to rebuild radar sites and stuff like this. They can do it a lot quicker than the United States can, for example. So, and that's one of the advantages here. Even if Iran expends a lot of missiles, we've seen, for example, there's been footage that just emerged of Iran firing a latest batch of ballistic missiles towards targets in Kuwait. And it appears that these missiles are newly painted, which indicates, again, what they've been telling us, and that is that they continue to produce ballistic missiles. That domestic industry, it's way cheaper than the Americans, and they do it quicker. They're just better at it in this mass production of munitions. And so it's not very easy to completely degrade them and completely destroy them. That being said, evidently, the US can do damage and does and is doing damage. It is striking targets all throughout Iran, the south of Iran specifically. And Trump is threatening to expand the regions that the United States is striking. So we should never underestimate the ability of the United States to cause massive death and destruction. It most certainly can. It has killed dozens, at the very least, of Iranian soldiers since this latest flare-up and the death of the Memorandum of Understanding officially from both sides. Well, Iran declared it dead on Monday. It took them some time to get there. They were trying to find a way back for some time, but now it has officially been torn apart. But if we simply look at what they're doing, they're striking the south of Iran. And part of that is because, and they started to do this actually during the 40-day war, is they want to, and by taking out now, as I'm speaking, they're bombing bridges, they're going after civilian infrastructure, they're going after businesses, warehouses, taking out water facility, all of this. And by going after this infrastructure, what they're trying to do is displace the population in the south here. Now, displacing the population obviously puts pressure on Iran. But also, what they're trying to do is degrade their capabilities, Iran's capabilities, so they can launch potentially a ground invasion. Because we are hearing threats. Now, I'm not saying that this is confirmed. It's absolutely going to happen. But this is exactly the strategy that you would implement if you wanted to do a ground incursion. Because as long as you're keeping it away from Tehran and Isfahan and Qom and Mashhad, the strikes are not going to be as effective. They're not going to have the same sting. And so what they're doing now is trying to displace people, to hit that civilian infrastructure, to make things hard there for people in the south, but also then set up potentially a ground offensive where they would try to go after perhaps some of these islands. I've spoken to a number of people. Some people believe that they will go after Qashim Island here. It's very close to the mainland, and I believe that would be pretty hard for them to defend. Some others are leaning towards that they will take Abu Musa, and then there's a lesser and greater Tumb here, which are the free islands that the United Arab Emirates claims belongs to them, but Iran operates in. And of course, these are the islands that are situated, amongst others that you can see around here, are situated actually in the Strait of Hormuz. But as we speak, the United States is dipping into its strategic reserves when it comes to oil. The prices are going up, and it's probably got around roughly 7 or 8 weeks that it can continue to do this. So it hasn't actually got that long of a span of time before things get really bad, and digging into their strategic reserves is not going to work anymore. It's going to start getting dangerously low, and nothing is coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. And realistically speaking, the amount of oil that was transiting the Strait of Hormuz, that was leaving the area, was nowhere near normal levels, even during the Memorandum of Understanding, when supposedly the Strait of Hormuz was open and the Trump blockade on top of Iran's blockade was abolished. Still, we didn't return to normal levels of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. So they haven't actually got a long time before things are going to really start to get bad economically, and we're going to see those repercussions. And as we spoke about before in the last stream, there's also another issue, and that is of Yemen, which started to flare up. The ceasefire was declared dead in Yemen not too long ago, earlier this week, because Saudi Arabia decided that it would bomb Sana'a airport in Yemen, in the capital of Yemen, which is controlled by Ansarullah. So Ansarullah announced that there would be a response that would come, and they attacked Abha International Airport and a military base and a Saudi air base. And there were air sirens that were going off in Jeddah as well while this was happening. But it appears like the real targets were the airport and the airbase. Now, there was a speech that was given today by the leader of Ansarullah, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, and he explicitly said that Sana'a for Riyadh will be the equation going forward, and that Ansarullah, the Yemeni armed forces that are under the Ansarullah-led government in Yemen, that they will attack Riyadh and they will go after oil and gas facilities. And I'm willing to bet they will totally shut down the Red Sea if offensive action is committed, especially on the ground or major airstrikes. They will completely blockade the Red Sea. And that is the real danger, because that is a major card that Ansarullah here in Yemen hold. They can close down Bab al-Mandab right here, and they can blockade the Red Sea, as they did blockading it for the Israelis. And again, for those of you that are perhaps new to the stream, We did cover this, and perhaps you may be aware, but the United States under the Biden administration launched 2 different operations to try and stop Yemen from imposing its blockade in the Red Sea. And then the Trump administration launched its Operation Rough Riders nonsense for a month and a half, where they used their B-2 bombers and they tried their best to degrade Yemen militarily, and they failed. So the real fear here is for the global economy that both Bab el-Mandeb and also the Strait of Hormuz will be closed at the same time, and Saudi Arabia will be choked off if it cannot use the Red Sea and, of course, export through the Suez Canal. So this is the big scare in terms of the economic repercussions of the conflict going forward. And again, we'll continue to monitor it because the Trump administration is claiming that it will hit civilian infrastructure going forward, and it will expand those attacks on on civilian infrastructure inside of Iran. And while that is happening, of course, the Israelis, as they're taking a little break in their offensive operations, their major offensive operations in Lebanon, because of course they're still doing things like dropping white phosphorus on civilian areas and firing on civilians inside of Lebanon. They didn't stop that, don't get me wrong. They've also committed to these massive attacks, airstrikes in Gaza. Just yesterday, they killed 14 Palestinians there. They've killed a number of others today. This is a recent airstrike. I just want to demonstrate this is what the people in Gaza are going through because they continue to attack. They continue to kill civilians, and they are refusing to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, evidently. They have taken over more than 60% of it. They keep pushing further and further with their yellow line. And here's an attack on an area where Palestinians are living still in tents because Israel will not allow reconstruction material to come through, and old tents because they won't allow even new tents to come into the Gaza Strip. Because, as God's chosen people that are the light unto the nations and the most moral army in the world, how dare you allow Palestinians to have new tents to live in after you bombed their homes and killed half of their families? So this is airstrike that took place recently in Khan Yunis. And again, you can see the intensity of these strikes that the people are enduring. So I always like to include something about Gaza because although there is not active resistance right now from the Palestinians against the Israelis, there, of course, is ongoing attacks on the Palestinians, and the people there continue to suffer in silence as the world has basically forgotten them, and nobody even bats an eye. Suddenly, when Israeli soldiers are being killed on a daily basis, then we're hearing about it in the news again, which is funny, that isn't it, that we hear about that. But there's another front which I believe we have to focus on and talk about, and the wider conversation surrounding that as well is very important to cover here. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this because the Trump administration has not been shutting up about its ambitions with Lebanon and using Syria in order to achieve them. And there have been some developments. So here's an interview that was conducted yesterday with Trump. And here's what he's saying still about Syria. And I'll explain a little bit more in context about how terrible this is, where this is going, why we need to pay attention to this, and then some things that we should probably pay attention to going forward to sort of preempt the nonsense and propaganda that's going to be thrown at us when this all goes down, if it is, in fact, a conspiracy that is hatched. So here's what Trump had to say.
When we spoke on the phone during the war that Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara may be tasked with dealing with Hezbollah.
He would go in and take care of Hezbollah, and he'd do it in a different way. He wouldn't knock down buildings. I hated to see buildings knocked down.
Are you saying Syrian president?
Just before we go further, he wouldn't knock down buildings. No, he wouldn't knock down buildings, but his forces instead would go into like villages and just like mow everyone down because they're a different sect. But, at least the buildings won't be mowed down. They'll be burned down with the people inside of them as sectarian chants are chanted outside of those buildings. It's most likely what would happen instead of Israel just indiscriminately taking out an entire city block, But he's right. Less people would be killed. So I guess he's correct. You got to give him points there on that. Maybe there is more humanity from these Al-Qaeda-minded fighters that would be the ones that would be sent in to do an attack in Lebanon if it was the case.
Are you saying you believe he would be more precise than the Israelis?
I think he'd be more precise, yeah. I think, and I can tell you, I know he'd like to do it.
Does he need the green light from you?
I'm thinking about it.
So he continues to talk about sending his friend, who he brags about putting into control of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, who he lifted the sanctions on Syria for, who he granted access back to his oil and gas and his agricultural lands. And still, Syria is getting worse economically. Still, Syria doesn't have proper electricity. Still, Syria's currency is devaluing. Still, they're cutting employment, government jobs. They're still cutting jobs at hospitals. Still, the situation is getting worse. Even though they have these pledges of foreign assistance, they have the sanctions lifted, they have ongoing, by the way, an illicit drug trade that is ongoing in Syria. They didn't eliminate it, right? Those gangs still exist because the country is not actually controlled by one centralized government. Now, corruption is part of this, but it's not controlled by one government. There are a bunch of militias all over the place. Everyone sort of controls their own territory. Everyone is armed. Everyone has different interests. And then there's all these different countries in there. So this is the situation that Ahmed al-Shara, or Abu Muhammad al-Julani, for those who have known him for a bit longer, during his heyday in Al-Qaeda or Jabhat al-Nusra, which then became Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS for short. It's a cute name, right? Al-Qaeda's Syria wing that then sort of broke away from mainstream Al-Qaeda, which we'll go into in a little bit, because a lot of people say this, but I don't think that they fully understand the implications of all of this and what it means. But we'll go into that a little bit more, just so everyone is clear, because there's these people that are like regime supporters in Syria that are just fanatically pro-Jolani, even to the point where you call him Jolani. No, you must call him Ahmed al-Shara. How dare you? Like, if you see the videos of the people chanting in the streets for him, a lot of people are chanting for Jolani, because that's what he's called himself for the longest time. But anyway, here's Jolani or Shara sitting down with Donald Trump. And here's what Trump talks about in front of him, talking about, these regimes not having any autonomy or the ability to stand up for themselves.
The president's done as much for Israel as I have. Nobody even close. If you look at, just look at all the things with Jerusalem, all the different things that we've done. The Golan Heights, I did things. Nobody has ever done anything for Israel like me, and we've made tremendous progress. And we've made a lot of progress with Iran too. Wiped out their military, but it should have been done 47 years ago.
If I could, do you think that
So the reason I played that clip is because he's talking about the Golan Heights, right? This is literally what Jolani is named after, the Jolan, the Golan Heights. That's the name, Abu Muhammad al-Julani. Okay? No wonder he calls himself Ahmed al-Shara anymore because, at this time. Because, you can't be calling yourself Jolani, because technically now the Jolan is all part of, you've accepted it somewhat, that it's part of the Israeli entity. That's no longer part of Syria. You're sitting there with the US president talking about how he gave away your territory. And here's the thing. Now, Shara has publicly denied weeks ago publicly denied that he's going to attack Lebanon. But then, in that same span of time when Trump was sitting down with him, Trump was asked again about using Syria to attack Lebanon, and the Shura sat there silent and didn't say a word. So, and it's clear, the reports have come out and they've been following up on this from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. In English, they're the ones reporting on this, perhaps the most. They've been the ones following this. But the reports have been surfacing, and there has been a growing mobilization and military buildup of different armed factions, and also as well they're bringing in their jeeps, they're bringing in artillery, they're bringing in tanks to the area, their drones, they're bringing it all towards the Lebanese border, as we've covered a number of times on the show before. So if we just zoom in here, just to demonstrate again where this is all happening, because it's important to have a visual representation. So what we've seen so far is that the buildup is happening here in towards the north of Lebanon, and then along the northern Bekaa area. The Bekaa Valley is here inside of Lebanon. And again, to reiterate for those who don't know, it is regarded as the area which is sort of the Hezbollah heartlands, where Hezbollah has a lot of its weapons. And so in order to inflict any sort of military defeat on Hezbollah, it is understood that you have to go into the Bekaa in order to take out Hezbollah or deal a serious blow to them. The problem here with this is, well, there's a number of different problems with it. But the problem here with this is that this will cause an enormous amount of sectarian bloodshed if this is to happen, unfortunately. And so because it's going to cause that, and right now there's just been set a date for a joint meeting between the Lebanese and Israeli militaries, because the proxy regime that is controlling the Lebanese government, the US proxy, it had signed an agreement with the Israelis, allowing them to illegally occupy the south of Lebanon, and then inventing these experimental zones. And the experimental zones, only one of them is partially inside of the territory where Israel is actually currently stationed, is occupying. So the rest of these areas, the Lebanese army is just going in there and trying to clear out Hezbollah. That's the whole point of this, right? And the other area is partially where the Israelis are, partially where they're not. So the Lebanese army will go into that area. The Israelis have to withdraw slightly. It doesn't impact their occupation of the south at all. But this agreement that's been struck, now they're coming together. There's a clear conspiracy that is being set, where the Trump administration very publicly is expressing that it wants Syria to attack Lebanon. And here we get into a wider discussion, which I wanted to go into, because it is important to note. Now, we're already seeing some of these stories emerge as well to try and create that pretext that is needed, right, about Hezbollah's alleged presence inside of Syria. And we've heard now there's a larger crackdown that's happening, that Syria seizes advanced weapons that were bound for Hezbollah. And the Iraqi government, which is also under pressure to disarm its own resistance forces, it itself now also is cozying up to Washington. And there's moves being made there. But the Iraqi government doesn't seem to be prostrating before Donald Trump's feet in the same way that Nawaf Salam, the prime minister of Lebanon, and the president, Joseph Aoun, are. But at the same time, it's important to consider what this is going to mean. And what do I mean by that? if they try and create the civil war situation inside of Lebanon, which they're pushing towards now, and they want this meeting to happen, the United States has deployed a military advisory team into Beirut. They're talking about potentially deploying thousands of troops into Beirut. That's not confirmed, but the military advisory team is there. They're pushing the Lebanese state to order the military to go after Hezbollah's weapons. That happens, the Lebanese army is going to split up. It's a civil war. That situation, by the way, Hezbollah can deal with. But if that's combined with an attack that is coming also from Syria, which will be backed up, do not doubt this, will be backed up by an Israeli air campaign. The Israelis will back it up 100%. Then what we're going to see is massive expansion of the war, which will go beyond anything that people had imagined. And again, just to have up here the map. Okay, so instantly, if these forces decide to go across from Syria, maybe they'll try and get into Tripoli first. There's some speculation about that before they go into the Beqa. But if they come across the border, instantly the Iraqis have said that they are going to cross over, that they are going to attack, and they're going to support, and by Iraqis, I mean the Islamic Resistance of Iraq, or what was the Popular Mobilization Units, Popular Mobilization Forces, Hashid al-Shabi. They will come over and they will attack. They've already pledged this, that if Syria attacks Lebanon, then the Iraqi militias, which are more powerful than the Lebanese, definitely the Lebanese army as well, but they were more powerful than the Syrian army, what today constitutes the Syrian army, and they will probably come to Abu Kamal and Deir ez-Zor, and in my opinion, that's sort of where they're going to most likely, if they do cross the border, they will go into these areas and probably try and set up maybe supply lines, right? So you now have the Iraqis involved in this war. So a civil war in Lebanon, an Israeli occupation of South Lebanon, a Syrian invasion of Lebanon, and then an Iraqi attack on the Syrian forces that are attacking alongside the Israelis and a segment of the Lebanese army, maybe some militias inside. This is the worst case scenario I'm explaining to you now. And this appears to be what the Trump administration wants. So when I'm saying this and I'm laying this out, is not to try and be alarmist. I'm trying to basically warn everyone as to how terrible this situation will be. Now, we've added on another layer to this, because the other layer is that we've heard officials in Iran say that not only will the Iraqis be going in, but they will launch airstrikes against positions of the Syrian regime if it goes and it attacks Hezbollah. Okay? Why are the Iraqis and the Iranians doing this? Now, number one, for strategic reasons. Number two, because they understand the absolute shit show that is going to be a Syrian invasion of Lebanon. Now, trust me when I say this, this will be an absolute bloodbath if it happens. It's not going to be fun for anyone involved. Now, the biggest problem is the death, destruction, the refugee crisis. Just expect that all the minorities from the region are going to clear out if something like this happens, or they're going to start to clear out. There'll definitely be an exodus in the event that this blows up and it goes out of proportion. So you're going to have potentially another refugee crisis on your hands, because you're going to have a war that goes through this entire region, right? And then what's going to happen on top of that? This is why Israel and Trump want this war, because this will be framed again as a sectarian war. And you will hear all of the sectarian nonsense and garbage coming. And we're also, there's two angles to this. Number one is for the Western audiences. So we're going to talk about how terrible these Muslims are and focus on the Muslims doing the horrible things and look at them, they're all head cutters and all of this stuff, all of the nonsense. That's why they're bringing up all of the controversies in the UK about grooming gangs that, were a big thing. I remember back in maybe like 2012, something like that. They were a really big story. but they're bringing that stuff back in order, and there's one reason for it, not because they genuinely care about victims of grooming gangs, because they want you to hate Muslims to justify more aggression. Because again, if the United States wants to deploy forces into Beirut, right, and it wants to expand its war in the region, and it wants to kill Muslims, and it wants to subject Muslims to all of these horrors, then it needs to justify what it's doing by making you hate Muslims, right? The second element of that, which in a way is probably worse, to be honest with you, because it causes more bloodshed in terms of direct between people and breaks up entire nations, is internally in the Middle East, because those Gulf Arab regimes, they have a massive amount of control over the media. And one of the worst things to come out of Syria was a massive rise in sectarianism, an insane rise in sectarianism. Now, it flared up after the Americans, who invaded Iraq from where? From those Sunni countries, by the way. They took out the Sunni leader of, and calling him a Sunni leader, Saddam Hussein, is not a Sunni leader. His identity is Sunni, but he wasn't a leader that he's a Ba'athist. not a Sunni leader, right? He didn't have an Islamic government. Anyway, the Americans launched their offensive. They had the support of the Gulf, right? They launched their offensive from the Gulf. They took out the Iraqi government and then replaced the Iraqi government with a new confessionalist system, and then allowed for Al-Qaeda and these groups to pour into the country and all of this sectarian war to explode, which made it bad enough in Iraq. But then it got even worse from there. And we know that they fostered many of these people in Camp Buka and these areas, these detention facilities, that would later become leaders of militant groups inside of Syria, right? But in Syria, what happened is the Gulf media went hardcore with their sectarian nonsense. And they made this war a sectarian war. And this is why you always hear the Sunnis and the Shias hate each other. Syria was not a Sunni versus Shia war. It was a political war. It was about geopolitics. Everyone was playing the game. Everyone was involved in Syria. You're hard-stretched to find anyone in the region that was not involved in Syria for some reason. What happened is, though, they wanted to undermine, because the Iranians are the ones that back all the resistance in the region, right? So, and I'm going to demonstrate, before we perhaps get into the other question and the hate that's being pushed in the West, for people to understand what is actually happening here, this hatred, the sectarianism, why it's happening. Because, many people, especially in the West, they just have nowhere to access this information. They have no understanding, unfortunately, because the media just does not talk about it. And you really have to dig deep and try and find this information if you want to understand the region. So it's important that people know this. And unfortunately, if you ask a lot of people from the region, they buy the propaganda, right? So they're on one side or the other of this. So when you're looking at what happened in Syria, right, everyone had their own interests inside of Syria. What you will hear from the people that now support the regime that is in Damascus currently is that there was a Sunni genocide, and that the Sunnis were fighting the Shia, and the Shia, they all teamed up and they were trying to ethnically cleanse and genocide the Sunnis, right? And they'll often give these insane figures, like 1 million Sunnis were killed in Syria, and there was a genocide against them, and they were persecuted by the Shia for some Shia mission, which is led by Iran. All right? This is just false. Now, were there cases of ethnic cleansing of Sunni areas that happened during the war? Absolutely. Were there militias inside of Syria that were sectarian, that went and killed people for sectarian reasons? Absolutely, there was. But the idea of a Sunni genocide and that this was a war between Sunni and Shia is nonsense. The war was about geopolitics. And this is something, unfortunately, that a lot of people cannot accept because they're way too emotional and they believed, again, the Gulf nonsense propaganda. And again, the Gulf had its own incentive. Because who do you think were funding all of these Takfiri groups? Now, the United States and the Europeans and the Israelis, they funded even Ashara, right? Abu Muhammad al-Julani, his Nusra Front, which is the Syrian wing of Al-Qaeda, the Israelis started funding, I believe in 2015. That's when it was exposed that the funding came to about a dozen different Al-Qaeda linked groups, most of them Al-Qaeda linked groups, some of which were allied with ISIS openly at the time. So that's that narrative that you'll hear from these people, and they hate everything Iran because of this. Now, just so everyone is aware, right? And I wanted to pull up the numbers here because they say, it's so bad, we can't forget it, even to unite for Palestine, blah, 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 because of the genocide in Syria, 1 million Sunnis, they keep repeating it. No basis for this claim, but 1 million Sunnis, not Syrians, Sunnis, they claim were killed, and it's even worse than Gaza, right? And there was enormous suffering in Syria. Hundreds of thousands of people, no doubt, were killed. I think those numbers are roughly around, the official numbers are around 600,000 killed from all the different estimates that are given. Now, they break down those figures in different ways, but horrendous, disgusting war crimes. It's so much happened during that war that was just unspeakable, unthinkable. And as somebody that covered it at the time and saw it, what was happening and all the footage that come out, you can't deny what was happening there. It was horrible. But I want to just now to demonstrate, because these people, they're hell-bent on something, and what I call it is Sunni nationalism that they believe in, right? This is their narrative. It's not actually about religion, right? And it's important to understand this, because it's not something that is often explained to a Western audience, and I'll go a little bit deeper into it and where it comes from. But just to look at this and to look at the facts. So this is, again, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which the supporters of Julani no longer like. They used to like the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights because throughout the entire war, it was based in the United Kingdom, and the guy who runs it is in Coventry, and it was extremely anti-Bashar al-Assad, extremely anti-Iran, right? It was obvious, to the point where even the Israeli media admitted that it had a bias against Iran, right? In the way that it reported things. But since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, it's been reporting on the massacres of civilians under the new regime. And that has made these people unhappy. And now they call this guy an Assadist, right? The guy who runs Syrian Observatory for Human Rights is an Assadist now. But we'll just go through the figures, because they say it's worse than Gaza, the amount of civilians that were killed, right? It's so bad. All of this, the Shia did this, blah, blah, blah. So, okay, out of those total deaths, this is Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the war from 2011, this was published in 2024, okay? That whole entire time. These are the toll from a Syrian opposition supporting organization. In terms of it was against the government. That's what I mean by that, right? It was against Bashar al-Assad, it was not aligned with Bashar al-Assad, right? And it was accused a number of times of certain political biases. So that's why I'm using its numbers. The total number of civilian deaths in the country, out of all of the deaths, right, that they have names for, that is, then they say there's more than this. The ones that they have names for is 164,223. The lion's share of them are men, right? And then there is women and there is children. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the Gaza death toll, actually, we have the figures that are much higher of those who are not fully identified. Their IDs were not taken by the Gaza Health Ministry, etc., right? But also keep in mind that Gaza, where the death toll is over 70,000 officially that have been recorded, the amount of children that were killed in Gaza and women killed in Gaza is roughly the same as the entirety. And we're talking about, in both cases here, the ones that are documented, not the total amount that died that are perhaps missing and we don't know where they are, okay? Because in both cases, the death toll is higher, right? This is the amount, roughly the same. The entirety of the Syrian war, killed by all sides. The death toll for children and women is around the same as it is in Gaza. In Gaza, in much a shorter period of time. And again, these are the figures that are produced by the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. That's what I'm going by. Okay? So let's go down. They say this number died in torture centers, regime prisons. So this means Bashar al-Assad. That's who they're saying killed these people. And they have the names for them. And they're saying this is in regime. So they're blaming they're saying regime, right? Directly. Okay? They don't actually have a toll for the amount killed by Iran. You know why? Because Iran's involvement, I'm not saying Iran had no involvement. Of course, the IRGC were there. Iran's involvement, you won't get a number for Iran, an accurate number for Iran, because their involvement, their physical boots on the ground involvement was not that heavy, right? Compared to the Russians and others. So their involvement wasn't actually as heavy. Now, what instead, where the amount of killed comes from, is like there was a lot of militia forces. So there were the likes of the Zainabiyun and Fatimiyun that came from Afghanistan and Pakistan. And there were Iraqi militias as well, Shia militias. And what happened is these people could volunteer and go and fight in Syria, sort of like with the other side, right? And I had friends of mine who are actually Shia who went to Syria to report there at the time and spent time with some of these groups. And they said to me, these people are crazy. They're nuts. Like they're not well in the head, right? And they would clearly just shoot into open areas and stuff. There were people doing crazy stuff, right? So sectarianism in Syria existed on the ground, but the war was not about sectarianism. And it wasn't about sectarianism for Iran, because again, the argument here that is given, Iran is allied with the Alawi, right? And the Alawi in Syria are a sect that they branched off of the Ismaili part of the Shia faith. I'm trying to explain this in the most easy way. So basically you have the two main, branches of Islam, right? Where you have Sunni Muslims, you've probably heard this, Shia Muslims. On the Shia side, the vast majority are what are called 12er Shias. And these Shia, they are like the Iranians, the Iranian government, the Iraqis, the Lebanese. Then you have other groups like the Yemen. In Yemen, you have the Zaydis, who are Shia, but more close to the Sunni school of thought, right? But the vast majority of them are 12er Shia. There's another branch called Ismailis, right, which are very, very, very different in terms of their belief system. I won't get into it, than the 12ers. And from there, you had splinter groups from this as well. And I believe they were an outgrowth of this, like the Druze, for instance, and they have very different views, right, than the 12er Shia. They are not the same thing. They're a million times different. They're as different, the Alawi are as different from the Shia of Iran as Muslims are from Christians. Like even more so, perhaps. They're even more different in a way, right? So there is a big difference there between the two of them. And in fact, the Alawi, historically speaking, the people that became Alawi inside of Syria, they took up this faith. Most of them were Christians. They weren't actually Muslims before. Most of them were Christians. At least historically, that's how it's what I've understood from reading about their history. So that alliance, for the longest time, even the 12er Shias, the mainstream Shia, they didn't even consider them to be part of the Islamic faith. That's how different they are. But again, the narrative is the political narrative, which is sold to gullible people, unfortunately, is that there's this alliance between Bashar al-Assad and Iran, and they both wanted to massacre and kill all of the Sunnis and expel them and murder them and all of the rest of this. And again, this is communicated, and it's communicated in all of the mosques. Everywhere you go, you'll hear this Sunni nationalism. Not everywhere you go, but you'll hear a lot of Sunni nationalism, right? And this idea of puffing your chest out. And it's not actually about the religion itself. It's not actually about the belief system. It's not about theology. It's about identity. So what they did is they created an identity, sort of the way that the Zionists created an identity, where they say we're Jews, and it doesn't matter actually anything to do with the Jewish faith at all. It's all about that identity that then enables you to do things against the opposing identities, right? It's like this extreme nationalism that is harnessed from a religious justification. And to understand this, also for those people who are listening to this and are going, oh, well, this is all so complex and all of the rest of this, right? Iran, just to end on this point, Iran behaved in the region not for sectarian reasons, but for geopolitical benefits. It did not want to lose its ally in Syria, and it did not want to lose its ability to support Hezbollah. It wanted to have this arc, which sometimes got called the Shia Crescent, right, inside of the region, where they could come from: Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. And again, that is a posture in the region which gave them power and is defensive as well, which gives them greater defensive power. And we know now that it is because they have literally been attacked by the Israelis and the United States multiple times. Their leader assassinated, their supreme leader assassinated, their civilians killed. And again, it's all because of one thing. It boils down to their support for resistance organizations and the fact that Iran is independent. It's the same reason, for example, why they will not side with Ansarullah, because it's independent and it supports the Palestinians. They won't deem them legitimate. It's got nothing to do with human rights. It's got nothing to do with, they're not a liberal democracy. Is Saudi Arabia a liberal democracy? Is there a democracy in Jordan? Is there a democracy that exists right now in Kuwait or in UAE? No, of course not. But it's not about that. So again, to sort of travel into it, to the point so people understand, because the second part of this is that sectarianism between Muslims to get Muslims to fight each other. Because again, if you understand the Greater Israel Project, the idea that was put forth by Oded Yonon, he was called, in his academic article, was that Israel should expand its borders and become an empire, not to just expand as in just grab the territory and put all Jewish settlers there, but the entire region should be sort of incorporated in an empire, per se. And in order to do that, you have to have these warring factions, and you need to break apart and balkanize all of those states within the Middle East. And how do you balkanize them? Well, you turn all of those different sects who even share the same religion, and you get them to kill each other. You get them to hate each other. And then you buy out leaders in each one of these groups. They've succeeded in doing that with the Druze. So right now, just so everyone is aware, the Druze are being backed. There's like Druze separatist militias, obviously not all of the Druze, but there's Druze separatist militias in southern Syria, which are being backed by the Israelis in the Sweda area, right? And these militias that are being backed once sided with the Syrian government because of Israel's support of Jolani and his friends, the Al-Qaeda linked groups. And there is, just so many of these different splinter groups because they could never agree with each other. And they ended up fighting against each other a million times, which there's a lot of history there, which I won't get into. But so now they back them in Sweda, and there's a US puppet in Damascus. So everywhere they want to play all sides. That's the whole point of this, to play all sides, to capture all different, and same in Lebanon. That's why they want to divide Lebanon. And right now, like, you'll see this propaganda that is spread in the West. There was this, what's his name, like Robert Lowe or something, he's talking about Muslims on Joe Rogan recently, and he made a point. Of course, you've got to make the point about Lebanon and inject pro-Israeli propaganda into your anti-Muslim stuff, because that's the whole reason you get paid, right? You get paid to do your anti-Muslim propaganda because it's Israel paying you and it's for Israel's benefit. But, anyway, he said on Joe Rogan, in the 40s, when the country was created, it was a Christian country. Wrong, it was not a Christian country. It's a confessionalist system where the president, right, has to be a Maronite Christian, but then it has different levels of government, right? So the prime minister has to be a Sunni Muslim. The speaker of the parliament has to be a Shia Muslim, right? And this is implemented into the system, right? And it's not a good, like, a lot of people have a problem with this system, by the way, right? I'm not advocating for the Lebanese system at all. But that being said, it's always been like literally the areas inside of the country, like the French actually started pushing more Christians into the area, by the way. But they claim that all these Muslims just poured into Lebanon out of nowhere and took over the country. That's the claim that was made on Joe Rogan. And then the country was messed up and there was a civil war and blah, blah, blah. And of course, that is bogus. That is nonsense. The population grew. Yes, the Christian population left. And again, it was not a Muslim-Christian war. Like the civil war in Lebanon was not about Muslims versus Christians. Right? Now, does sectarianism bleed into things? Of course, it always does. But that's not the main reason. Like, again, the way that they portray this stuff is that these crazy Muslims and there's these different groups of these Muslims and they want to kill. So we have to kill them. We have to be pro-Israel. We have to butcher them. We have to not consider them human. And then we have to lie about the history of Lebanon, for example, and how it was created and how many Muslims were, these Muslims just came into Lebanon. What? There were never any Muslims in Lebanon? Like that's what you're contesting, is you're trying to say no Muslims are. If anything, Lebanon was cut off of Syria as a project to try and make it inorganically a Christian outpost. But there were always Muslims there, right? So this idea, the Muslims just came in and ruined it. And now we have Hezbollah. Again, Muslims. Like it's just this lump sum group. And then whenever we hear about Sunni and Shia and all of this stuff, it's all of this nonsense, which I just explained is all about geopolitics. And it works on the people, even in the region. But the ones that these people that are sort of held up for all of the terrorist attacks that we see and all of that, and the ones creating all of these issues and Al-Qaeda and Daesh and all of that, they grow out from an ideology which was created by a man who lived in the 1700s. His name was Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, right? And so this guy teamed up with Hamad bin Saud, the Saudis, right? And later, his ideology would be used by the Saudis at the time for them to fight and take over territory from different tribes, to massacre their people, to make them pay money to them, to convert them, even though they were already Muslim, but they were just different types of Islam that they believed in, right? This ideology that came out of the Najd region of Saudi Arabia, what is now Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, this ideology enabled the Saudis, that family, to justify attacks to take over Mecca and Medina. And what they would do is they, killed all of the clergy there, right? They wiped them out to a large extent. And what they did is they created their ideology where in Islamic thought, as Muslims have the idea that if someone is a disbeliever, obviously there are different categories of that in Islam. So there are people of the book, which will be relevant to what I'm saying in a minute, which is Christians and Jews. But people that are not believers in the Islamic faith, there is something called like the excuse of ignorance. So you can say, okay, the person doesn't believe in the Islamic faith, but maybe they're ignorant, maybe they don't know, we should help them learn. That's basically the approach, not cut their head off because they're not a Muslim, right? But here is the thing with the Wahhabi mentality and what these people today, they call themselves Salafists, believe, right? And I'm not trying to talk about their religious views too much and their theology. I don't want to get into that. But just historically speaking, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab said that there are certain practices that are done by the Muslims at the time who were living under Ottoman rule that made them non-believers, that made them apostates from the Islamic faith. And he did not apply the rule of the excuse of ignorance to these people. And so the Saudis, who wanted to take over territory, used this ideology in order to justify seizing territory from people who were already Muslims, because in the Islamic faith, you can't fight other Muslims for just no reason because you want to take their land. So what happens is he came up with this idea that these people are not Muslims, they're non-Muslims, but they're even worse than people, for example, like Christians or these Jews or whatever, because they claim to be practicing Islam, but they're perverting it, right? So they're even worse. So they didn't just say that individuals were doing these sins against what is real Islam in their minds. They said that entire populations. So they could go in and kill anyone they wanted and take territory. And then they allied with the British, right, against the Ottomans. And this is actually crucial to the history because the alliances that were built, right, the Saudi alliance that was built with the British, how do they justify it? They justify it by saying, well, these people we're fighting are not actually Muslims, and the British are Christians, people of the book. So we can unite with the Christians, and these people are actually our enemies, these non-Muslims who are living under the Ottomans, right? The Ottoman army, they're non-Muslims. So they're worse. So we can ally with the people of the book so we can help them take over Palestine. We can fight, to take over whole of Sham, the Levant region, right? We can take over all this territory with the British. We can help them take over all this territory from the Ottomans because the Ottomans are not Muslims. So now you take this ideology that has been used, right, and that has been preached, and which is in the hands of very wealthy Gulf elites. And they use this ideology and the excuses that were created within this ideology in modern conflicts, so that you can say that an even bigger problem than the United States occupying our territory or the Israelis occupying our territory and bombing our people and all of this are the Shia, because the Shia are fellow Muslims, but they're not practicing the right faith, and they're worse than the Jews and the Christians. So we can justify killing them because of this, because they've corrupted and perverted the religion. That is the ideology in a nutshell. I'm not going into all of the intricate details of it, and there are people that are well more knowledgeable than me on the topic of the theology here, right? But this is in a nutshell the ideology that enables these Al-Qaeda and ISIS people to go, yeah, we can kill those people, and our main enemy are other Muslims. So when you hear all this nonsense, ISIS and Al-Qaeda and blah, 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 and they try and compare them to Hamas, by the way, according to these very same people, Hamas are not Muslims. Why do you think in the Gaza Strip right now, there are 5 different militant groups that were set up, and there are Salafists, people who believe in the Wahhabi ideology, who are part of these militant groups, which are backed by Israel and fighting against Hamas as the proxy of Israel. And the UAE, by the way, has been accused of directly having been involved in backing them as well. Why do you think those people? Because they believe that Hamas are grave worshippers and that they allied with the Shia, and because you're allied with the Shia, you're basically you're a non-believer. You should die. Okay? Hamas in Gaza as an organization has fought against that ideology and purged those groups from the Gaza Strip. It fought actually major battles in Gaza when those groups tried to rear their heads multiple times. And there were suicide bombings and all sorts of stuff that were carried out inside the Gaza Strip against civilians, again, because these people, they're like, oh, these are non-Muslims. Okay? So this ideology, which is very, very pertinent in Syria right now, where what happened is gullible people were brought from around the world and indoctrinated, and they were shown these images, these horrible images of children crying in Syria and the bombs dropping and these people starving. And they were told, you're a Muslim, you need to do something about this. So then, they end up getting in contact with a group, and it ends up being, your friendly MI6 or CIA agent that ends up, backing your trip, funding your trip. You don't know it, right? That it's actually like MI6, CIA, Mossad, whatever. They're actually behind sending you there. But you're angry. You want to protect the Syrian civilians. That's your ideology. And then they just start sprinkling in this stuff, the Shia, the Shia, the Shia, and this ideology. And then you're there, you're seeing people get killed. These are the fighters I'm describing right now, which potentially will be sent into Lebanese territory. These are people that, in many cases, their knowledge on their own religion isn't even that great. A lot of these people. But they have this Sunni nationalism, and they don't understand they're fighting in a political conflict, a conflict that is about geopolitics, that is not about cleansing the area of Sham and making it, I suppose, pure faith or whatever they think it is. But there are a lot of these people, foreign fighters and also Syrians alike, who are there in Syria, who could potentially get sent into Lebanon. And then what's going to happen in Lebanon? What's going to happen when these people reach those villages? Well, we saw what happened with the Alawi. And now people go, oh, they're going after the remnants of the regime. That's what they call it, right? The people that were previously, they say, supporting Bashar al-Assad. It's always in the minority neighborhoods you're going after them, though, isn't it? But okay, they say they're going after people. Occasionally, there is somebody arrested that was in like the intelligence or, whatever, an army, general, whoever, somebody that was accused of doing something under the previous military structure, the Syrian Arab Army, whatever. But they just went in, and you saw the banners. And if you were paying attention to the footage at the time, these people were coming in pickup trucks, and they were screaming stuff about the Nusayris, which is the old name for the Alawi, which they call them. They don't call them Alawi. They call them the Nusayris. And they went in and they butchered people, and there's plenty of footage of it. There's plenty of footage of them speaking on the back of pickup trucks about going and killing them. And then everyone they don't like and everyone that they have beef with is shabiha, and we can kill them. And again, it's people that have weaponized for their own political objectives these powers, including the United States, the Israelis. It's this sort of ideology, by the way, this Wahhabi ideology is communicated by the Israelis themselves. This is Israeli propaganda towards people, and they buy it. And it's unfortunate because this is how these conflicts are created in the region. So when you hear this nonsense about Al-Qaeda and ISIS are the same as Hamas and Hezbollah and Ansar Allah, this is nonsense. It couldn't be any further from the truth. Any further. And this is the problem with, unfortunately, we have heard about Muslims since September 11. We've heard about Muslims. We've heard about the Islam and these Muslims and blah, 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 and terrorism and all of this stuff on every single news program they inserted and all the TV shows and all of the movies, everything, for years, for decades now. And nobody, I guarantee you, the vast majority of the people who are not originally from the region themselves, some of whom might disagree with certain things that I am saying here, even, they might have their own opinions, but no one very few of the people that in the West that come from a Western background would have known all of this information that I'm saying right now, right? And it's not onto everyone to know it, but if we're going to be so obsessed in the West with Muslims, with the Middle East, we should know some of these things at the very least. Like, you keep talking about Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all of this stuff, and there's all of this stuff in the news and terrorism and all of it, but nobody is educated on this stuff. And it's the fault of the media, straight up, because you have to dig, you have to read books, you have to go and visit the region, you have to actually, it takes a long time to learn all of the stuff that I'm communicating here. And this is something that I believe it's important. The reason I've spent so much time on this today is because if the situation blows up in the Middle East again, I can see this sectarianism spreading even further. And then as a result of it, you're going to see all these videos, all of these terrorist attacks, all of this stuff happening. And then people are going to come on and go, look at those Muslims. Look how barbaric those Muslims are. And these Sunni and Shia fighting each other. And this is why Israel has to do its thing and kill all of these people. That's the arguments you're going to hear. And it's all being prepared for everyone. So if this expands and it gets as bad as what it could do here, then we're going to see that this is the propaganda pushed, because they've done it before and they'll do it again. But I'm hoping that at least this information will help people somewhat, so that people understand a little bit more about what's going on, because it's important. It's very important that people do understand this context. That being said, we will continue to monitor the situation in the region. There are, of course, ongoing back and forth strikes between each side. We're waiting to see what happens on all of the other fronts. We'll bring you all of the footage that emerges from the region as it is coming out. I just want to remind everyone, if you got this far, we are looking for 300 new members to make sure this show stays alive, and you can join us on our Patreon or here on our YouTube membership. And you are much appreciated, and those who have joined, we have massive appreciation for you, because you are the reason why we're here and we're able to have this show. So if you are still here, please do hit that like button. Please do share this video. Please leave a comment as well, because the comments do help us in the algorithm. So that would be a massive boost. And of course, as well, we get suppressed in the algorithm, of course. So if you are subscribed, hit that notification bell button. You will get notifications. Hopefully, some people don't, but hopefully you'll get a notification when we are live and when we post new videos. So we will continue to monitor everything as it emerges, and hopefully get into more. But I do hope that everyone enjoyed this episode, and everyone enjoys the rest of their days. And we'll see you again, same place, same time, back here on Monday and then Thursday at 4 p.m. CST. So thank you to everyone for being here, and it is much appreciated. Make sure to stay up to date with all of the updates of the war on our MintPress social media handles.